I'll make a start. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I'll just say good evening. Welcome to our webinar on livery yard insurance. I'm Rosie here on behalf of SEIB, hopefully to provide some insight, information and answer your queries on livery yard insurance, why it's so important and why if you're a yard owner or a manager, or perhaps you're in the middle of setting up some livery yard business, you're looking for some insurance cover, you've got some queries, hopefully we'll be able to answer that this evening for you. And so before we begin sort of properly and Cheryl introduces herself, I thought I'd just let you know a little bit about myself. I've been working for SEIB now for coming up to 4 years. I work within our equestrian services team as part of an equine specialist team. I own horses myself and compete them, having enjoyed various successes at county level showing. Sort of highlight for me was taking my small hack to the Royal International Horse Show, and then also enjoy helping my family with sort of a couple of project horses, started down the route of eventing and carriage driving. And hopefully, and sort of most beneficial for you all here this evening is I also help my family run our own livery yard. So it's just a small DIY yard, but it's very much a family affair and takes up a lot of time in between my full-time work at SEIB. I'm sort of really aware of the trials and tribulations of horse ownership, yard management, trying to keep all your livery horses and livery clients happy. So I know it's a labour of love and one I do fully recognise myself.
Thanks, Rosie. So I will introduce myself. Lots of you will know me, some of you won't. I'm Cheryl John, so I run a website called Livery List. I set it up in 2011. It was predominantly a livery yard directory, but over the years it's become apparent that there wasn't a great deal of support for yard owners. So in 2019 we added the Yard Owner Hub, which is a huge resource for all aspects of practical and administrative yard management, and then we've just relaunched it onto its own website. It's the only resource of its type for yard owners. So through Livery List and the support that I provide to yard owners, I've also worked as a consultant in the livery industry since 2018. I work for charities and associations such as Red Wings, the ABRS, working with SEIB amongst others. And I also run a really popular support group for yard owners on Facebook. I think we're up to about 2,500 verified yard owners on there now, which is probably where those of you that know me from. It's a really friendly group and it's helped highlight a lot of the problems that yard owners face long term or at any specific moment in time. So my main ethos is to kind of help develop and add value to the livery industry by improving the standards and the quality and helping yard owners understand what I and the industry refer to as best practice. And one of those things would obviously be to ensure that you are correctly insured for your yard and for all of the activities and services you provide. That's why I've worked with SEIB to put this webinar together this evening with Rosie, who's very kindly given her evening up to come and answer questions. So there's going to be a lot covered and we're probably going to be quite quick. So it might be worth getting a pen and paper to write down any notes. There will be the possibility to ask questions. There's a chat function in Teams. We've turned everybody's camera and microphones off just because there's quite a lot of people attending, so it makes it a lot easier to manage from our point of view. If you have got any questions that you would like to have answered, not specific questions, but perhaps questions that would be of general interest to everybody on the webinar, then feel free to add them in the chat and I will pick those up at the end or as we go through and put them to Rosie at the end. Other than that, that is it. I will hand you back to Rosie, who's going to give you a bit of a general overview about insurance needs for livery yards, and then we're going to launch into a bit of a chat to cover some more specific areas. I had actually, prior to this, put a post on the group about questions that yard owners might have in terms of the most common things that get raised about insurance. So we have tried to cover as much of those as possible in as much generically as possible, because obviously each situation is different. So Hopefully what we're going to give you will be very useful. I've certainly learned a lot of information in this process, and so hopefully you will too. So I'll pass you back to Rosie for a second.
Brilliant, thanks Cheryl. Yeah, just before we begin, in fairness, and I do apologise, but we do just need to go over the following, more for the purposes of legality more than anything, and as our slides sort of note here, we do just have to let you know, and I'm obliged to say that the following and sort of what we'll discuss this evening, it is for informational purposes only, and as Cheryl says there, we'll try and keep it general to sort of cover the main topics for everyone rather than going into the specifics. So yes, it is for informational purposes only. It's not legal advice that we're giving this evening. So I'll just give you sort of 5-10 seconds here just to read the slide if you don't mind. It's just as I say, so that when we go through our sort of question and answer session, as I say, everyone's individual circumstances are different. So it's just general advice we're giving tonight and not legal advice. Perfect. So yeah, I mean, we'll sort of just launch off and start by saying really, well, why is insurance important? You know, why are you paying to take it out? Why are you having it? You know, and perhaps other people have got their insurance in place on their own individual horses. I'm sure it's something we will cover in more detail. But basically, public liability insurance, which forms the body of livery yard insurance, is there to help prevent against the unforeseen circumstances. So it's sort of there basically if you have a customer or employee, even a trespasser coming onto your land and you're found liable, then that's that public liability insurance in place there to protect you in that instance. It becomes applicable if you've got members of public on your land, walking on public rights of way, horses on your property, they kick or injure someone and you're found liable, then again, that's where that insurance is important and why it's there to protect you in the event of the unforeseen circumstances. And we'll just touch on as well briefly sort of the Animals Act 1971, because this is hugely important. As a horse owner, keeper, horses are in your care or, you know, under your sort of business, you can be found what we call strictly liable under section 2.2 of that Animals Act. Even if you're not with your horses at that point in time, they escape in the middle of the night and damage someone's property, injure someone, you can be held liable under that liability there. So as we say, just we'll sort of go, we'll probably discuss it in more detail and more depth there, but that Animals Act 1971 is very important to remember because that's where that liability can be found against you and you could be held accountable for it. So yeah, just sort of going back there in terms of what insurance you need, it's very much a case of sort of, as I say, you need your public liability insurance in place there. That's going to protect you if a third party is injured, you know, there's property damage and you're found negligible or liable for that. Employer's liability is one that by law you must have if you've got someone working for you, employed by you, even if they're non-paid, they're voluntary, they're a work experience student, that is an absolute must-have there. And then again, I'm sure we'll sort of touch on it in more detail as it's questions we often get asked. You get other elements there as well of cover that you can add on to your policies, such as what we call care, custody and control. So if horses in your care are injured, perhaps while you're handling them, while you're offering a livery yard service, then that care, custody and control element, which is, you know, covering you for injury to the horses themselves, that can come into effect here as well. So yes, as I say, I'm sure Cheryl will ask lots of questions as we go on further, so I'll try not get into too much detail too early on. It's just to give you a quick overview here. But as I say, what's obligatory is very much employer's liability. So you must remember by law that is absolutely something you must have in place. Generally, we say it will always be offered at least 5 million, but most policies you'll find will give you employer's liability as standard at 10 million. As I say, it's a government requirement. You can be heavily fined if you're trading without it. Other insurance that you want to keep in mind here as well is if you've got vehicles that you're using as part of your business, tractor, quad bike, they're going on the roads. Again, you need to make sure you've got your own motor policies in place for them. And then riding schools as well. For if you're a riding school, I know we're here more to talk about livery yards, but perhaps you're a riding school and you have a couple of liveries you know, on the premises as well. Then public liability for your riding school is going to be compulsory. But as we say, we always recommend it's a must-have for livery yard businesses themselves, freelance instructors, so on and so forth. Any equestrian business, we would recommend you want public liability in some way, shape or form to cover you if you're found negligible or liable there. And then, yes, I think we've already seen the slide already, but yes, as I say, just in a world of unforeseen circumstances, you know, litigation claims that we see, they can run into the millions. So this is where you want that public liability in place. It's there to cover you in the event of a claim. And if you don't have it in place, then it's your own personal assets that are at risk. As I mentioned, sort of the Animals Act as well, important to remember that that liability can come back on you as a horse owner or keeper under that section 2.2 of the Act, what we call strict liability. So yeah, even if your horse is on a retirement livery yard, you know, 50 miles away, that liability could still come back on you as the owner or keeper if they escape and cause damage. So yeah, as I say, sort of before we launch into our question and answer session properly, hopefully that's just giving you a quick and brief overview. But I'd say sort of a take home point from the offset really is that your insurance is in place to protect you. I think it shows the credibility of your business. You're demonstrating to your prospective customers and potential employees maybe that, you know, you're a responsible yard owner. You've thought about the risks on your yard and what you can do to protect yourself and others when you're there. So yeah, hopefully that's sort of a brief overview, and we'll sort of launch right into it, I think.
Yes, thank you, Rosie. I was going to say as well, if all has gone well, this should be being recorded, so it will be available for you to go back and rewatch if you want to go over anything that we discuss, or anything else, any of the slides. I know some of you saying that you can't see the slides. It might be because of the way that you have your viewing set up. But if you go back on the recording, it should show perfectly fine with all of the slides. Right, so Rosie and I are just going to have a general chat now about insurance, like I say, putting forward lots of the questions, and so we will set off. So first off, Rosie, a question that lots of yard owners always ask is, if they have a livery yard and they make sure that the horses on their yard are insured for public liability, third-party liability, why does a yard owner, or does a yard owner still need to have liability themselves for the yard?
Yeah, it's a good question, Cheryl, and it is one we see lots, and hopefully sort of what I briefly alluded to just now in the slides is, you know, under that Animals Act, yep, definitely the livery yard owner or manager wants to make sure everyone does have their own liability insurance in place, because that protects them if that horse causes damage and they're found liable under that Animals Act and under that strict liability. But then the livery yard owner themselves can also be found negligible or liable. Say, for example, those horses were to escape from one of the paddocks and it was due to fencing that hadn't been maintained, or was part of the business that you're covering there, and you're running as a livery yard owner or manager, that liability or that claim could also come back on you. So we would say it's a must-have cover there, because liability can work in two ways. It can fall on the owner themselves and then also fall on the yard manager too. We also see that public liability claims, they range from various circumstances, and it all comes from an allegation of some kind of negligence. That's going to be the main trigger of a claim brought against you. So somebody, you know, livery yard owner might be coming up onto the yard, tending to their horse. They slip or trip over due to an uneven circumstance, uneven sort of surface, or visitor comes, they're sort of injured by a falling hay bale, then that claim may be brought against the livery yard owner themselves. And again, that's where a livery yard insurance policy is there and designed to be in place for them. Again, it can come down to down to the small details. You know, you offer them a cup of tea and the tea spills on their smartphone. Again, that claim could come back on them. So there's so many different circumstances of how negligence and liability claims can work, and that's where you would want your own policy to protect you for the business you're running.
Great, thanks, Rosie. Just to clarify to everybody, there aren't any slides now, so if you can't see any, that will be why. Right. Okay. So the next step that a lot of yard owners think of insurance is care, custody, and control, which is obviously quite unique. Somebody else has already brought it up actually, but very rarely this is also referred to as animal bailment, which I believe we checked was the same thing, but it's more commonly called care, custody, and control. Not all yards have this or are aware that they have this, and a lot of yards are under the belief that you only need care, custody, and control if you are handling the horse. So, for example, if you've got full livery or if you're doing ad hoc assisted services. Is that the case, or is it something that all yards should have?
We would say that it's definitely a sort of must-have cover again, and often it will be included as part of a livery yard insurance policy, and something you definitely want to be checking with your broker. Is it included? And as I say, often it will come as standard, and something you want to double check there. But yes, it's designed and in place there to cover you for the injury or death of those third-party horses, so those livery horses on the premises, again, where you could be found negligible or liable. So even if you're not a full livery yard, but yet you're purely DIY, but you're the one responsible for providing the land itself, maintaining the paddocks, maintaining those fences. Again, if injury or death occurs to those horses and that liability claim is brought against you, that care, custody, and control cover is there again to protect you in that instance.
Okay, so basically for any type of yard, even if you're the most basic DIY and they get on and do everything themselves, you should still have care, custody, and control.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're still the one offering livery to them. That horse is still on your premises, on your land, as part of your business. So yes, we would say it's a must-have cover. And yeah, you'd be wanting to check with your broker to see if you can have it included as standard, or yeah, perhaps how much it would cost to add on. But certainly, I would have thought with a lot of policies, you should get a level of cover included as standard on your policy. So always worth checking.
Great. So that covers on the yard. What if you something through the course of your livery services sees you take the horse off of the yard? So, for example, if you have to take the horse to the vet, or if you are offering a schooling or competition livery, whereby as part of that livery package you're transporting the horse and then you are carrying out a service such as riding, exercising, schooling at a facility that's not at the yard, would that still be covered under care, custody, and control as well?
So I think that it's very much going to depend on what type of service you're offering, and if that service includes competing, schooling of horses, then yes, you would be wanting to check again with your broker that your public liability insurance and that care, custody, and control cover extends to those activities. We would say in terms of the transporting of horses elements, that would be a different matter. If you're a horse transporter, and you're more than likely going to need to require your own insurance, or again be double checking with your insurance broker who's setting up the policy that that's covered. If you're a horse transporter in your own entity, then there's sort of lots of regulations and requirements within the transporting and licensing industry. So for example, an operator's license, you're taking payment for shipping goods, which essentially shipping goods would extend to livestock and horses, then yet you may well need a separate policy in place there. But yes, for the care, custody, and control section, if you're a livery yard, you're a competition training yard, that's what you do is take horses to compete an event, then that care, custody, and control cover should be extended to cover that, as long as you're clear and transparent with your broker that that's the service you're offering.
Okay, perfect. So another thing that has cropped up recently, especially since COVID, is the value of horses has leapt up dramatically. Mm-hmm. And it became apparent that some yard owners, especially those that perhaps have a higher value horses and ponies, perhaps competition horses and such like, they were finding that they actually had a level of indemnity for each horse that was perhaps lower than the value of the horses they had on their yard. And I think this is something that a lot of yard owners weren't aware was a thing, that there was necessarily a limit per horse. So what can yard owners do to make sure that they've got the right cover for the value of the equines they've got on the yard?
Yeah, definitely. It's one well worth checking. And as you say, sort of COVID prices mean that horse values have gone up considerably. But yeah, it's going to depend on your individual yard insurance provider. So again, you'd be wanting to check your policy documents. If you're through a broker, give them a call. They should be able to check or let you know as well. But yeah, absolutely ask and find out what limits are available. So here at SEIB, we offer a standard £10,000 per horse, but we can go higher on our care, custody and control levels. We can do £25,000 or £50,000 per horse. There is an aggregate, so what we call an overall limit within the year of £100,000 in any one policy year. But yeah, absolutely, if you've got a competition horse, you can look to increase that, certainly with us at 25 or £50,000 per horse there. Again, you need to phone in and check with your broker or check your policy documents to see if there's going to be an additional cost for that, or to see if it can be added on or increased there. But yeah, well worth checking.
Okay, and what would happen? Somebody's just asked, so it seems a prime time to ask this. What would happen if you were underinsured to the value of a horse? So if you had a limit per horse on your policy, and obviously the owner claimed that the value surpassed that level of insurance that you have, what would happen if that, in that circumstance?
So that would be a case of, yep, if you've got inadequate insurance in place, then your own personal assets could be found at risk. So a bit like, you know, not taking out public liability insurance at all, then it is your own personal assets that are at risk there if a claim is brought against you and you're found negligent or liable for that.
Okay. So that's something important for yard owners to consider. So moving on to a different subject, livery contracts. They are becoming more popular, but still a lot of yard owners don't have them. And I know that there is benefits for various reasons for having livery contracts, but in the context of insurance, is it beneficial to have a livery contract? For example, could it be used in defence of a claim if there was something covered in that contract that could pertain to a defence against, you know, responsibilities or arrangements that are in place for the horse?
Yeah, no, fantastic question. And it's one that insurers are really trying to encourage policyholders to do, is to have the correct risk assessments and livery contracts in place. Absolutely. It's always wise to do that and include within your livery contract or associated documents that you're using particular behaviours of a horse. So if it bites, if it kicks, if you're employing handlers or grooms, they need to be made aware of that. You can then do your own extra precautions with those animals, carry out relevant risk assessments. So yeah, in the event of a claim, absolutely that sort of information and evidence is there to help defend the claim in that instance. And at the very least, it means that you are seen to be taking all reasonable precautions to try and prevent a claim from happening in the first instance. So yeah, that kind of detail, definitely go into as much detail as you can, because it's really useful to defend a claim, or can be used to defend a claim there, definitely. We would say as well, with, you know, on that note, to say you can't do enough in terms of documenting and doing risk assessments. Perhaps you'd want to include your yard rules within a livery yard contract, and then issue sort of a yard handbook to your livery customers. It then again means if a claim arises and you know, you've then got that contract in place there as evidence that perhaps they were ignoring your guidance, or if you've got written yard rules, insurers can then use that again to defend you in that instance. So yeah, I mean, it's sort of like, it sounds like common sense. And as I say, we're out at a family run a livery yard. You know, you sort of want to be seen to be taking all reasonable precautions. But yeah, good example here is you've got a rule about hay bales. Don't climb on them. Don't take one from the top because the bottom will fall out, then fall on someone, again cause an injury. So if you've got a simple yard rule written down and stated in your contract, and someone signed that contract and returned it to you, you've got a copy, they've got a copy, everyone signed it, and you know, an incident occurs, in the event of a claim there, you've got that as clear evidence to defend you there. So yeah, absolutely. You know, we do offer a risk management guide at SEIB that we offer to our customers who've got policies with us. It's sort of free upon request, but yep, it provides really useful sort of templates and tools to help you do risk assessments and form up livery contracts. It's not about creating a lot of sort of paperwork, but it is just giving you a guide there to sort of try and do as much as you can and have evidence there to defend you in the instance of a claim, definitely.
Okay, and I know a lot of yard owners will agree that they get faced by some very bizarre claims from their livery clients, especially when it comes to terminating livery contracts. So in terms of insurance, if there was a dispute over a livery contract or the contents of a contract, is there any way that you can be insured against that, you know, disputes, or if somebody says that you're in breach of contract, anything like that?
Yeah, so I guess it's sort of important to distinguish here then. Your yard insurance is for your public liability, employees' liability if you have employees, to defend you for third-party property damage or bodily injury. So if it's more of a dispute in terms of contract or a legal dispute, then yes, you'd be wanting to add on legal expenses onto your policy. So it is an add-on, and it's something you'd need to ask about, or you know, again, inquire with your broker to see if you can add it onto your policy. So yes, it would be the option to add on legal expenses, and that's where that would be designed to help you and give you legal advice for problems such as contract disputes with staff, debt recovery if, you know, someone's not paid a livery bill, employment tribunals, for example. So yeah, that would be sort of where legal expenses would need to be added onto your policy, and then if something like that were to occur, that's what that would then be used for, and that would definitely be sort of legal services or legal advice, essentially. So yeah, they would help with the sort of progress of litigation there in the event of that sort of claim or dispute. So yeah, again, we would say though, if you can have your contracts really clear from the offset and get people to sign them, get people to sign your yard rules. So again, it just makes it clear from the offset where you stand, where your livery clients stand. And then again, in the event of a claim, you've got that as evidence there to defend you in that instance.
Okay, that's useful. Going on to a different matter now, this was something that cropped up on the group a couple of months ago, in that if a livery yard is providing storage for tack, or they have a rug room, or they're providing storage for anything basically that belongs to their livery clients, does livery yard insurance cover any element of clients' belongings, as in their tack, or is that something that is solely the responsibility of the horse owner to make sure that they have it insured adequately?
Yeah, so under your livery yard policy, you could only add on your own personal items, so your own tack or trailer, and you'd need to be including property damage and then contents cover within your policy there. So again, something you'd need to add on. But to answer your question specifically there, Cheryl, no, it wouldn't cover livery's tack or livery's contents. That belongs to that person, so it's their responsibility to insure it. So you'd need to make it clear to your liveries again from the outset, if they're keeping their tack on the yard, then that would need to be covered under their own policy and not the livery yard owner's policy. And again, they'd be wanting to sort of check they've got the right security in place there for the tack and contents that they're insuring.
Yeah, that's a good point. So that's something that a yard owner could put in their livery contract, because I know certain insurers, when it comes to tack, have a certain level of security that's needed to make sure that it can't just be walked in and walked off with. So I think that's a really good point to raise, is that maybe that's something that yard owners need to make sure of their clients, that if they're bringing, especially if it's high value tack, or lots of horse owners like to bring a mass quantity of tack and rugs and never-ending equipment, that really the horse owners need to make sure that all of that is covered in the event that there was a theft or anything. That's a really good point.
Yeah, no, definitely. And yeah, again, every individual horse owner would need to check with their own policy what those security requirements are, and that they are then met as well, because yeah, for a claim to be valid, there would need to be the right security in place to start with. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, super. So in terms of caring for a horse on their yard, I think somebody's asked a similar question just now as well, but if a livery took advice or guidance from a yard owner and it resulted in injury to the client or their horse. So, for example, if a yard owner was watching somebody school their horse and suggested they should try a different bit, or they suggested that they should change whatever it is they're being fed, is there any sort of professional indemnity? I guess it would be along those lines that would be included in a professional yard owner's cover.
I mean, that one, again, you're then going into more of the specifics of what you're offering on a yard, but it would no. So if you just got traditional yard insurance cover and you're offering extras like that, then no, that's not going to be covered. If you're offering services such as freelance instruction, then again, you'd need to be making your broker aware, and they could potentially look to add that onto your policy. And you'd need to make sure your business description is very clear to cover those exact activities you're doing. So again, you need to be clear and transparent with your broker as to what activities you're doing, and make sure that is then covered on your policy. And your yard policy's business description would need to be clear and accurate to reflect that. But if you're going down the lines of offering specialist advice, such as the fitting of tack, you offering sort of nutritional changes to what to feed a horse, then no, you'd be operating outside the protection of your traditional yard insurance. And you'd really need to be looking at sort of getting, and if you're keen to offer that to your livery clients, you'd need to be looking to get in professionals with their own insurance, so qualified saddle fitter onto the yard, qualified nutritionist onto the yard, and again, make sure they all have their own public liability and professional indemnity insurance in place to cover them, because yeah, that's operating outside of the remit of traditional yard insurance there.
Okay, so basically, if you're to be on the safe side, anything like that, you're better off just to refer your clients to get somebody that's a professional nutritionist or qualified saddle fitter or what have you, just to be on the safe side. Okay. And what about veterinary guidance? So if a livery client's horse has been given a specific medication, or they need to be bandaged or have something applied to them daily, or some yard owners even get given the responsibility to give injections, where do livery yard owners stand if they're medicating or treating horses under veterinary guidance? Would that be covered as well under care, custody and control or something?
I think you'd need to make sure and be very clear with your livery clients that it's on your contract, your livery contract. So if it's under veterinary guidance, then absolutely make sure you're following every procedure that the vet's given and the guidance on. So you're only going within what the vet's told you to do and what the client signed on perhaps their livery contract. You're not deviating from that. But yes, if that horse is under their care and they've been instructed to do so by the vet and the owner, that would be okay there. It's where it's not perhaps on a livery contract, it's not under veterinary guidance, you'd be in very grey area there. So I'd say stay clear in that sense, unless it's directly under that vet guidance and instruction that you've been given to do so.
Okay, and on veterinary matters, strangles biosecurity is again something that's becoming more popular. Popular is not the right word, but as in yard owners are more mindful of it these days. It's kind of lost the stigma a bit. So yard owners are a lot more open if they have an outbreak on their yard, and a lot of yard owners are now realizing the costs and business disruption and just general yard disruption that could occur from a breakout of something like strangles or equine flu on the yard. Is there any sort of cover in place that could be put in place for this eventuality?
Yeah, I mean, so it does exist, definitely. It's what we would call business interruption cover. So it would protect you against the loss of income for those specific insured events. But it is an add-on to a policy, so it would be an additional premium that you could then have that cover in place to extend to things like strangles outbreaks, infectious diseases, and the resulting loss of income as a result of that. But yeah, you would need to add it onto a policy. So again, it'd be a case of talking to your broker, going through that with them. And we would say there with the sort of likes of strangles outbreaks, influenza outbreaks, for it to be valid on your policy, if you've added that cover on, it will be subject to strict biosecurity measures, biosecurity protocols that you'd need to be following. So, for example, quarantine stables, adequate vet checks. So, yeah, check your policy wording carefully and make sure you are adhering to that policy wording if you've got that on your policy. And you've added it on, you've paid your additional premium for that business interruption cover, make sure you are then following the biosecurity wordings on your policy documents. So if you do need to claim, you're within the boundaries of that claim to be valid.
Okay, great. So again, it's like prevention is better than cure with everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're gonna move on to a topic now that is quite popular with a lot of yard owners, and it is people doing things on the yard. So I'm going to try and cover this as generally as possible, because obviously a lot of things are very specific and there's certain arrangements that people have. So this is just going to be a general overview. So one of the main things that I get asked is, where do yard owners stand if liveries are helping each other on the yard with one another's horses? So not being paid, but they might just be swapping jobs or on like a buddy system. How would that affect the insurance of the livery yard, perhaps, if there was an accident while one livery was doing something with another livery's horse?
Yeah, so I would say there, you'd need to be very clear as the yard owner. If you're not involved whatsoever with those arrangements, it's just the two livery individuals arranging that solely between themselves. If you as the yard owner are not involved in any way, shape or form, and that accident occurs, then that negligence would fall between those two individuals who are involved, and that would then go on their own horse insurance policy if they've got public liability added on there. So again, that sort of actually links directly back to what I was saying right at the start about the Animals Act, and you know, that strict liability would fall on those two individual owners. So if you as a yard owner are allowing that to take place on your yard, you just want to make sure you have no involvement whatsoever between those two individuals. So if that accident does occur, that's on their policy, not on yours.
Okay, and what about if they were being paid, whether a yard owner knew or not? If jobs were being paid, so say a livery yard client was turning another livery client's horse out every morning and they were being paid for it, would that change anything, or would that still be just solely an agreement between the two horse owners?
Again, the livery yard owner would want to have no involvement there whatsoever. So again, if something was to occur between those two individuals, that would go on whatever insurance policy they have in place. And that's where we would, you know, strongly recommend that everyone has their own liability cover in place. Bear in mind, if they're being paid to do that, then perhaps that's in the services of a freelance groom, and again, you'd be wanting to check they have their own insurance in place to do that. But again, you'd want no involvement between those two individuals. If that's up to them to organise, then that's why, you know, they'd want their own insurance in place.
Yeah, so basically as a good level of due diligence as a yard owner, that's one of the reasons that you would want to make sure that every horse is at least covered for liability that's on the yard.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's why you can see why some yards insist that every individual has their own cover in place. And again, going back to sort of livery contracts and making it very clear what you as a yard owner are responsible for, and then what the horse owner's responsibilities are. So if the two horse owners are doing something completely out with the yard responsibilities, that's all on their own insurance and nothing to do with yours. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so another common scenario that I think will be quite useful to cover is what happens if liveries themselves, as in livery clients, get asked to help out the yard owner. So perhaps it's getting dark and the yard owner wants to get the last few horses in and they're asking the livery to help. Or again, something common is kids being left on the yard, either actual liveries that have got ponies there that are younger, or children of liveries that are perhaps accompanying them that are just, you know, helping muck out or allowed to lead the horse or pony out to the field. I've learned in this process that that's a big no from a liability point of view.
Yeah, definitely. It is a big no-no. Basically, any request to a third party, so a livery client, their children, to, oh, can you just help out, bring that horse in, carry that water bucket over here for me? Yeah, you're basically asking for trouble, and we'd strongly advise against it. That's where really we see personal injury claims arise from, as can you just help out sort of situations. And they actually become really difficult for insurers to defend, because in the majority of cases you'd be found negligible or liable for that injury. So yeah, we would say absolutely it is a big no-no, and make it a yard rule to never ask clients, children, visitors on your yard to help out, even if it's a sort of tempting one-off favour. And again, that would include clients sort of assisting in lieu of yard services. Unless they're an employee and covered under employer's liability on your policy, we would say steer well clear of that.
And as well as that, so supervision of children crops up quite often. So I know when I was a child with a pony that I would just get the bus to the yard and just live at the yard the whole time until my mum picked me up from school. And I would spend virtually all weekends there, fully unsupervised, helping out on the yard. So a lot of yard owners say, obviously times were simpler back then, I think, but even still now, a lot of yard owners, I think the word would be dumping ground. They get a lot of children left at the yard at weekends and after school. So what is an insurance stance of unsupervised children being left on the yard? Because obviously that poses an extra risk.
An extra risk, yeah, definitely, Cheryl. Well, we would say the yard owners, again, sort of a bit like the above example, should not be supervising children or instructing them in any way, shape or form, or giving them jobs, even if it's sort of, oh, can you help out here and get that pony in. Yeah, we would say no, you do not want to be supervising children if you're the yard owner. If you've got suitable risk assessments in place and there is someone responsible for them, but it's not you, then yourself as the yard owner, that might be okay, because they are being supervised, and definitely you would need someone supervising them, just not yourself. So in the event of a claim, that's not going to be coming back on you there. But there are lots of rules and regulations around working with children and children being on yards. So if you do, for example, have employers' liability and you're taking on volunteers, you'd be wanting to make sure that you've got sort of correct safeguarding, DBS checks in place. There's also sort of limits on the hours of work that children can do, so work permits, for example, but you'd only be looking to do that if you've got the correct employers' liability cover in place on your policy, and that you've got them noted down as volunteers, work experience students, for example, or employees. So yeah, just be very, very clear and careful there. If you've got children on the yard, that they are supervised, but it's not by you yourself, unless you're taking them on as a work experience student volunteer and you've got the correct employers' liability cover on your policy and in place there. So yeah, just be very careful with sort of clear boundaries and lines there. And if you're unsure, again, check with a specialist broker or check with the broker you've got your yard policy with. Okay.
So a question that actually a couple of people have just asked, and it seems the most opportune time to ask it.
Yeah.
If you have employers' liability insurance,
yeah.
I suppose to an extent you are then covered, are you, if you have liveries that if you then ask a livery to help you bring in horses and you've got that employer's liability which covers people, would it then cover you in that circumstance?
As long as they've had the correct training in place, you've got the risk assessments in place, and again, you've spoken to your broker and the correct number of employees are noted down on your policy. So it's often not a case of, oh, I've added on employer's liability, so anyone and everyone can help me. Employer's liability must be accurate and up to date in terms of numbers. So often policies will ask how many are full-time, how many are part-time employees, how many are volunteers, how many are work experience students. So paid or unpaid in that capacity, the numbers would need to be accurate. And again, it couldn't just be a case of, oh, well, I've got employer's liability, so so-and-so can go and get that horse in for me. No, you'd still need to be doing the correct training with them, going through risk assessments. So there is a fair bit more to it. But yes, employer's liability and having that on your policy would be the best first step. And again, speak with your broker to make sure you're doing everything correctly and it's accurately noted on your policy accordingly.
Okay, good. Thank you. Aside from liveries helping out the yard owner, where does the yard owner stand with others that might help on the yard? So this is kind of along the same lines, but so for example, they're friends or family. So if a yard owner is very lucky enough to get to go away on holiday, and they have friends or family covering the yard, or if their husband and their husband's mates are doing some repairs on their yard over the weekend, perhaps some fencing or something, what are the considerations that need to be made with insurance in that situation?
Sure, and again, it sort of comes back to what we sort of touched on just now, really, and some of the most serious claims we've seen under our yard policies that have involved sort of catastrophic injuries to third parties is that situation of a friend assisting with yard maintenance that ironically has absolutely nothing to do with horses themselves or handling horses directly. So just to give people some examples here perhaps would help. We had one livery yard client and they found themselves liable for injuries to somebody's relative. And they were visiting the yard as a one-off, and they sort of saw that the roof needed some repairs doing to it. They offered to assist. There were no risk assessments done at all. Incorrect ladders, I think, were used, incorrect, equipment, and the person who suffered the injuries, who offered to help and assist on that case, they didn't have any of their own insurance in place. They weren't a sort of a builder, working on a sort of contractual basis. So they went up onto the roof, sort of were tinkering about up there, and they fell off and sustained fairly severe injuries. And the compensation settlement paid by insurers exceeded £2 million there. So that's sort of one example we've seen. Another similar one, again, sort of not directly involving the handling of horses at all, but again, a friend of the yard owner, I think, was offering to assist with some fencing and drilling holes into the ground with a motorised auger. Again, an injury and an accident occurred, and that claimant, they suffered life-changing injuries as a result of just offering to assist and help with the fencing on that sort of one-off favour basis. And again, our livery yard client was found liable for those injuries. I believe that occurred back in 2016. And to date, so far, insurers have paid over £3 million worth in compensation, and that negotiation settlement is still ongoing. So we've sort of seen significant claims, and significant claims do occur on the basis of, I'll just help out and I'll just assist. So again, it's a big no-no. As tempting as it is, say no, because if you're found negligible or liable, that's going to directly affect you and come on your yard policy there. So it would be a case of, again, making sure you've got the correct employer's liability insurance in place if people are helping, as I've mentioned already, making sure you've got strict risk assessments in place. And again, it's sort of where you then want to start considering, is your level of indemnity cover on your public liability insurance, is it high enough to cover claims if they do occur? And often limits of liability cover can go up to 10 million. So it's very much a case of trying to select the highest you can afford there to cover you in that instance. So it is something that you need to be very careful on, and claims can and do occur and can be high when they do happen.
So what about if you're using freelance staff like self-employed grooms? Would yard owners still need employer's liability if that was the case, if that was the only people that were coming and working on the yard, or would that person be expected to have their own insurance?
So again, this is where you need to be careful, because if you've just got casual staff, you would still need employer's liability cover to protect you. If you're the one giving those staff members instruction, even if they're self-employed, or as you say, they're trading as a freelancer, but if you're giving them the instruction to go and sort of sort out multiple horses, so I need you to turn out those 3 horses, muck out those 3 and bring those other 3 in, and you've given that instruction and guidance to that person, then you would need employer's liability to safeguard you in the event of a claim occurring there. Employer's liability is required by law, and you would be suffering substantial fines, governmental fines, if you're found without it. The only other time you wouldn't need employer's liability is if they are working very much on a self-employed basis, and you have, again, no involvement between the horse owner and that freelance groomer or instructor coming on site to give that lesson or do that service. Again, it sort of goes back to our previous example. If you've got no involvement whatsoever, they're purely a sole trader, then that freelance instructor could come onto your premises. But again, you'd be wanting to check with them that they've got their own insurance in place and that the level of cover they've got in place at least matches your own policy as well. So again, in the event of a claim, everyone's covered for the different elements they're involved with.
So really, it's just a case of making sure that you're properly insured for everybody that will be on the site, and just making your insurer know it's not kind of a employer's liability and then it's a free for all.
Free for all.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So
yeah.
Another question kind of around that of people being insured when they're on the premises is about facility hire. If you have an arena, or quite commonly now people have got some a jumping paddock with schooling fences or cross-country schooling fences, is that covered under a standard policy, or is that something that you would need to have specific insurance for?
Yeah, again, good question, and we can appreciate, particularly in these times, hiring out facilities can be a really sort of useful additional source of income or avenue, revenue even. But yeah, again, you'd be wanting to check with your broker that you can do that and it's added onto your policy accordingly. It wouldn't, again, necessarily be covered under standard yard insurance. So again, you need to be clear and transparent you've added it on. But yeah, with the hiring out facilities, again, comes additional risk. So again, it come back to doing suitable risk assessments, carefully sort of controlling who's using the facilities, again, sort of contracts to be signed, doing your risk assessments, making sure all parties are aware of what's involved, and again, making sure that all parties follow the correct procedures that you have in place and that they also have their own insurance. So perhaps if you're hiring out your arena for a club to come and use, again, make sure that riding club has their own insurance for those activities they then offer in your arena. So yeah, it all comes down to sort of good practice, good business responsibility. Make sure you're doing your correct procedures and documenting your risk assessments, documenting that who's using the facilities and when, and yet sort of again making sure every individual has their own liability policy in place as well for the actions that they're going to carry out whilst there.
Okay, so on the signage subject, which you mentioned, actually there's a couple of questions about signage that have already popped up, but I said to you before when we were discussing this in preparation for this, that I remember when I went to a riding school when I was younger, it just had a massive sign up, like an A0 sign that said riding is at your own risk, as in, yeah, we've told you don't call us if something bad happens when you're having a lesson or something. So it comes up quite often about signage on yards, no smoking riding at own risk. I know some people have mentioned ones about if you have a horse that bites, putting a warning on the stable or for electric fencing. What is the stance from an insurance point of view about having signage? Is it a good thing or a bad thing to warn people?
Yeah, no, definitely, and sort of, I know I keep referring back to it, those sort of risk assessments and everything there, but yeah, from an insurance stance, we would strongly encourage it. Absolutely, you're raising awareness of a hazard and of a risk. So if you know about a hazard, don't ignore it. Take steps to draw people's attention to it. As you say, make sure you've got appropriate signs in place, but make sure they are then specific to the place where that sign needs to go. So if you've got, caution electric fence signing, for example, put that on or very close to the electric fence. So it's going to be at its most effective. But yeah, I mean, basically, clearly highlighting any potential hazards can only really be a positive factor if something does happen and a claim does occur. Again, insurers can then defend you in that instance because you've taken measures and you've done steps to try and prevent that claim from happening in the first place. So yeah, absolutely, we would say, yeah, we sort of strongly encourage it, definitely.
So I guess that's the same for physical actions as well, because always in the winter when there's ice, there's always discussions about gritting, whether you should grit if you admit that it's slippery and somebody might slip over, or do you just let them slip over because it's obvious it's icy, or things like chucking some straw up the ramp of the muck heap. I guess that's the same sort of basis, is that you are then actively taking precautions to try to better a situation that might be risky.
Yeah, definitely. And as I say, it sort of all leads back to, yeah, if you're aware there's a hazard there, don't ignore it. So if you know the yard's slippy and icy, then yes, sort of, if you've got sort of a yard group chat, let them know, just be careful today, the yard's quite icy, I put some grit out, there's additional grit bags in the stable entrance, for example. That's certainly what we do on our yard. So yes, don't ignore that hazard, and do take all reasonable precautions to prevent an injury or an accident from occurring, definitely.
So from a paperwork point of view, all yard owners should have risk assessments, and they should be keeping up together with them regularly, because really that's defence to an extent if there were to be a claim, as well as these other preventative signs or actions or whatever. That's also what you would deem a necessary step, as good yard management.
Yeah, I think the best first step is you've taken out your insurance policy, which is fantastic. That's sort of there to then defend you in the instance of a claim occurring. But yes, you still have a duty to prevent accidents from happening. So your risk assessments and keeping them up to date and amending them as and when applicable shows that you are taking those reasonable precautions to protect your employees, your livery clients, the horses on your premises as you go about your business activities. So you're essentially thinking about what could cause harm on the yard, what are you doing to try and mitigate that. If you need to highlight something, you're doing that to, again, draw people's attention to that potential hazard, and then sort of showing what further action needs to be done, again, to try and prevent that claim. So it's not about creating huge amounts of paperwork and red tape. It's just about identifying a problem, such as stack of hay bales, and then taking reasonable precautions to try and prevent an injury or an accident. And so, yeah, your risk assessments are there to help you to help defend you in the instance of a claim, and to reduce hazards as and when you identify them, essentially, is what that would boil down to.
So someone's just asked, actually, are you obligated to share risk assessments with your clients, or is that more just a business document, is it, that's kind of for the yard owners' records, really? There's not any obligation to share it with people on the premises?
So you could include that certainly within your perhaps your yard rules or your yard contract, and when you're perhaps asking people to sign rules such as don't climb on the hay bales, don't pull hay from the bottom of the pile because it's going to cause bales to fall on top of you. So you do want people to be sort of signing to acknowledge that they've read your rules, and part of your rules will have naturally risk assessments written within them, such as the hay bale example. So yeah, we provide at SEIB really helpful templates to help you draw up your risk assessments, and then if you need to incorporate that into a livery contract, then you could do. Okay,
sorry, I'm going to ask you another one now, just because it's opportune. We're on the subject.
Yeah.
Somebody said, how often is too often for risk assessments? I mean, I was always told it should be 6 monthly unless something changes, which is the kind of what they're asking. But what would an insurer kind of expect to be an up-to-date risk assessment?
I guess that is how long is a piece of string. It really depends on your business. If you're a very busy riding school with multiple horses on the premises, you've got liveries coming and going daily, then you may need to be updating that daily, weekly, for example. If you're quite a small yard, and as you say, Cheryl, nothing's changed, then as long as you've got your risk assessment and you're reviewing that perhaps quarterly, monthly, again, as long as it's up to date. So if a claim does occur, you've got a risk assessment perhaps trying to cover as much as you can in relation to your specific yard and what's going on there. So I think that's a difficult one to try and answer generically, because it really is going to depend on the individual circumstances of each yard there and the activities taking place. But I mean, for us, an up-to-date risk assessment would include the activities and what you're offering on your yard. And as you say, if something's changed, then definitely you'd need to be updating that as and when's required. Yeah,
so I just guess just as often as you feel necessary for what you do. Okay.
Yeah,
that's probably a good thing. So I think a lot of yard owners are still not on the risk assessment boat. So it's definitely one. So I think just to have one for some yard owners would be good, even just a basic one. Perhaps, like you say, if it's a busier yard, it's something that should be more they should be more mindful of. So you've touched on business interruption briefly when we were talking about biosecurity, but if there's a range of scenarios that could happen, a fire or infectious disease, anything, how does the business interruption policy help a yard owner if something were to happen that meant that the business could not run as normal for a period of time?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. When we did sort of mention in relation to, as you say, sort of strangles outbreaks, flu outbreaks, but essentially, yeah, business interruption there, it's an add-on, so it's not going to come as standard on a policy. You'd need to add it onto your policy, and there'd be an extra premium or payment for that. But essentially, yeah, it is there in the event of a serious incident, so fire, floods, and you've got your buildings and contents insured on your policy. You've got business interruption cover there. There's a horrific fire on your premises and you can't trade. And that business interruption is there to cover that loss of income. So you can usually select what we call different indemnity periods. So perhaps 12 months, 24 months can be offered by some insurers. But that's where that business interruption would then come into effect and pay you that loss of income, loss of revenue in, say, the result of you being unable to trade because of a fire or a flood or a storm. But you'd need to be, again, clear and transparent with your broker if you're adding that onto your policy about your yard earnings and your income, because that's what the business interruption cover is based on. So if you're not clear and transparent about your yard income and you do try and make a claim, again, it might not be valid, or you might not get as much of a payout as you thought you would. So again, always speak with a specialist broker in terms of if you want that cover, the details required to add it on. And yes, again, just be very clear on policy wording. So again, that sort of strangles examples. There is going to be certain biosecurity protocols or sort of certain clauses you'll need to follow to then have that valid on your insurance if you do try and claim. So it's definitely there, and it's an available add-on, absolutely, but there's sort of boundaries that it works within, and essentially is a loss of income cover, essentially is what that would boil down to.
Okay, and what about a yard owner themselves? If they were to find themselves incapacitated or injured, you know, I've seen it before, especially if it's a yard owner that solely runs a yard on their own and perhaps doesn't have any staff or any family members that could help if they were taken ill. Is there any sort of cover that could be taken out that would help in that sort of situation if a yard owner was not physically able to run the yard?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually, because I think sometimes there's a bit of confusion with public liability. Remember, that's for third party property damage or bodily injury. So if someone else is injured, that's where that claim would be covered. But yes, if you yourself as the yard owner is injured, you're going to be wanting your own separate personal accident policy in place to cover you for your own loss of earnings, or as you say, if you're permanently or temporarily incapacitated and you can't work and you suffer a loss of income, then yes, again, it's a separate policy, so you'd be paying an additional premium for it. But yes, you've then got that as peace of mind. If you're a yard owner and you have a horrible injury, then you've got your own cover in place to protect you. So again, yep, sort of clear differences there to bear in mind. Personal accident cover would be for you yourself as the individual, and then public liability on your yard insurance, that's for those third party property damage or bodily injuries. Again, if you're taking out a personal accident policy, a bit like travel insurance, always check the policy wording. Again, check with your broker that you're taking the policy out with that it does actually cover equine related activities, because not all policies will cover horses. A bit like travel insurance won't cover particular countries, the same applies to personal accident policies there. So again, double check the wording, and if you're in doubt, go with a specialist broker that knows and understands the equine insurance market.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point, that last one. So about the cost of insurance, I think it's become apparent in our discussions that there's lots of different insurances that yard owners should think of to make sure that they're covered. It's not just simple like taking out a livery yard policy and then that covers anything and everything that you might do. A lot of yard owners are obviously saying at the moment the cost of living, everything's going up, that they're finding huge hikes on their insurance policies, whether it's a renewal or if they're taking out a new policy or looking for comparisons. There's so many other costs that are going up for yard owners at the moment. Is there any particular reason why insurance is going up so much as well.
Yeah, we're trading in interesting times. So what we call, we're in a hard market, so I'll try not go into too much sort of insurance jargon, but basically it is what we call a hard market. It's characterized by premiums going up, which is what, as you say, everyone's seeing at the moment, but that is in turn driven by a number of factors. So economic factors are a big one, but for businesses in particular, and yards specifically, there's also been a lot of changes to how the government has changed how they award personal injury claims. So where we've seen claims in the past, they now go into their millions. And so for insurers to be able to pay out on those claims, it means that premiums have to go up to what we call balance that book of business. So we're seeing a lot more paid out in claims, a lot more claims come in as well, just the world of litigation and how that works. So that means in turn there's more settlements. So that's all seen a big uplift in premiums going up. And then again, of course, where you do need employers' liability as mandatory, and you have to have that through government regulation. Again, that's sort of a payment that you have to consider when you're running a business. But that all then, as I say, adds on to the cost and the knock-on effect of your policy premium, unfortunately. So I'd say it's a sort of a combination of things, essentially. There's never one clear-cut answer there, but yeah, it's what we call a hard market, and that's due to a number of changes behind that process.
So what are the best things that a yard owner could do to try to keep down their insurance premiums without actually just cutting out the things they think they might not need? But is there anything else they can do to try and reduce the cost of the premiums?
Yeah, I mean, I can appreciate it's probably not what people would consider a lot of fun, sort of phoning up insurance brokers and getting quotes. I can understand, it's not really what you want to be doing when you've got a yard to run and you've got horses to look after, but do your homework essentially. Try and dedicate the time to shop around, speak with brokers who know the market, understand the market, and can try and find you the right policy for you. And it's always worth seeing what can be combined on one policy and perhaps what might be cheaper to split up over a number of different policies. I'd say that if you're running a large yard, or perhaps you're a yard that's diversifying, so we've seen it, for example, you previously been an agricultural arable farm, and then you want to start using those fields to offer DIY livery, for example, you are going to need a broker that can perhaps look at those as separate policies for you. So you may need a separate policy for the farm side of things, a separate policy for the equine side of things, and then perhaps you want your property insured separately as well. So have a look and see, as I say, do your homework, search the market, always be clear and transparent with a broker so you make sure you are covered correctly at the end of it all. But yeah, if you're doing something on a large scale, it's likely you are going to need a couple of separate policies, or perhaps if you're trading under different limited companies, you've got yards in different locations, again, they may all need separate policies. So to try and reduce your premium really comes back to, doing your homework, speaking to some specialist brokers and sort of shopping around to try and see what's the best out there, really.
Okay, and so a lot of yard owners are looking to diversify what they're doing, obviously, to try to bring in more income, or put empty stables to use, for example. So if a yard owner then found that they were offering services outside the remit of livery yards, so perhaps they move into licensed activities like doing riding lessons on their own horses or ponies, or owner pony days, or if they are having clients come to the yard and they're instructing them, or even if they're subletting out part of their premises, which a lot of yard owners are looking to do at the moment, just for little sole use areas or to sublet. Again, that's something, is it, that they would have to let their insurer know to make sure that that's covered? It's not something they should just start doing willy-nilly.
No, please don't. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely you'd be wanting to speak with your broker to make sure that you can get cover for that in the first instance, say for example through that subletting of yards and stables. But yeah, anything falling under the horses for hire bracket, so if those horses are being used to offer a service to the member of the public, such as riding school lessons, pony days, even if it's non-ridden activities such as grooming, leading ponies, absolutely you'd be needing to inquire with your local council about getting the correct licence in place. And that would be a legal requirement by government law again. And then, yes, you'd need to be, again, speaking to a specialist broker, because if you've already got a policy in place and you suddenly want to start offering those activities, that could be seen by the insurance company as a change of circumstance or change of risk. So absolutely, it wouldn't be covered, and you'd need to be adding it onto your policy and making sure your broker's aware of that. And before you start offering those activities, definitely make sure you've got the right insurance in place beforehand, and the right council licenses if it's required. And that is your responsibility to check with the local councils to what license you may need. So yeah, absolutely, you'd need to be doing your homework on that. And again, as I say, if you sort of start setting up different limited companies, again, to sort of try and split your businesses out to perhaps run more efficiently, again, you may need different policies then if you're operating and trading under different limited companies. So again, yeah, speaking with your broker and being clear and transparent with what you're doing or what you want to do, definitely. So anything different. So say you're a standard DIY or full livery yard, but suddenly you want to offer dealing or breaking services, competition training livery, again, you must notify your insurance broker, because we would see that as a change of risk, essentially. So yes, you'd want to be checking there.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily going to cost you more. It could well be something that your broker or insurer says is already under the remit of what you do, but perhaps just not worded specifically. But you should let them know anyway, just to make sure that you're covered.
Definitely, if you've not informed your broker, then it might not be covered under your policy. So yeah, absolutely, if you're thinking of doing anything differently to what you told your broker at the renewal or at the new business when you got your quote and you first went on cover, if there's anything different, you need to be informing them so that you've not breached your contract of insurance, essentially. Yeah.
Okay. You touched on it earlier about the level of liability, and I've seen it before about yard owners saying that if they have a lower level of liability, it in turn makes their policy cheaper. But can you just explain what level of liability is for people that don't know or understand how that might affect a policy?
Yeah, of course. So the level of liability is what your insurance would pay up to in the event of a claim. So probably the best example is sort of the claims examples I gave earlier about the fencer and the builder falling through the roof when they were doing building repairs even. So let's say you only took out a public liability level of indemnity of 1 million. If you had a claim that occurred and it went over that 1 million, you're only going to be covered by your insurance company up to that 1 million. So anything over and above, that would again come back on your own personal assets. So we would always say there, although it might be tempting to go for that cheaper option, try and always go for as high as you can afford. We can't advise or recommend what level of cover you take out, because that is ultimately what you'd be covered up to in the event of a claim. But do try and go for as high as you can afford. And again, it comes back to when you're doing your homework and you're shopping around, get quotes on a couple of different options and try and go with what's most viable for you and the highest you can afford.
Okay, so yeah, I know a lot of yard owners are finding it hard with so many overheads at the moment, and some might be tempted to chop things out of their policy, but ultimately in the long run, I suppose if there then is a claim, that's their own personal assets that are then at risk, and their own finances, rather than it then being a business insurance. So I guess the best thing is to ring up a broker, be completely honest, and to make sure that everything's covered. Don't cut things out that you might ultimately need.
Yeah, so as you say, Cheryl, it's sort of perhaps tempting to try and cut costs or remove cover, but it's probably in these times that you might find you need your insurance more than ever. And always remember, employers' liability is required by law. Even for those non-paid volunteers, work experience students, you still need to have that cover in place. And again, be wary if a sort of try and go with a reputable insurer who's perhaps A-rated, who's UK based, and help use a broker to help you review the market to see what's out there in terms of the cost and what's most effective for you. So yeah, again, always check your policy terms. Something might appear cheaper, but there's usually a reason for that. So for example, they might impose a very high excess. So if you do have to claim, you're then actually paying that excess is quite high in the first instance. or they might have numerous restrictions in place on that policy to make it cheaper, or it might be an insurer that's outside of the UK and therefore not financially secured, financially strong. So as I say, sort of again, try and do your homework where you can. It may not be the most sort of fun sounding job on a sort of, you know, Monday morning, but yeah, do your homework and do review the market with a specialist broker who can help you.
Okay. So right, we're heading to the end now. Sorry, I know that we've run over. There was so much to try and cover. I'll just in a minute go through some of the questions that have been asked, but Rosie, out of everything, so I've tried to cover a broad spectrum of everything, but is there anything unexpected or anything you've had crop up before that you think a yard owner might not think about when they're thinking of their insurance cover and their insurance needs?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I sort of mentioned earlier, work permits are one that often I think can get overlooked, but if you've got sort of work experience students or you're taking on pupils and your employer's liability cover who are at school and of a school age, make sure you've done your correct DBS checks if they're required, and work permits. Again, they may be required by the pupil's local council, so always check that. Perhaps another one we see that's maybe often overlooked is if your yard's based at home and maybe you've got livery clients coming in to use the loo or pay their livery bill, as simple as that sounds, do make sure your household insurer is then also aware. Again, so if that person comes into your house, goes into your loo and slips over on the wet floor, again, your household insurer is aware. So that might be something that's overlooked, but again, you're just trying to cover all bases and do be clear and transparent with your insurer, with your broker, so they can help you as best possible.
So you're much better off to use a specialist equestrian broker because obviously they understand like SEIB, because they understand the industry, as opposed to just going to a generic business insurer. Yeah,
I mean, I'm horsey myself. A lot of us at SEIB are horse owners. We understand the risk. You know, we have a sort of strong track record in arranging the right insurance for you with the right insurers out there who are UK based. We have sort of chartered status, but yeah, as you say, if you're doing your homework and you're shopping around, it is things you want to be checking. Make sure that broker's got the right knowledge to be able to advise you and make sure you are covered correctly. I mean, for our own part at SEIB, we've sort of got over 5 decades worth of serving the equestrian industry and in, you know, equestrian sector for insurance, and we've sort of got knowledge and expertise that we've built up over time. We do tailor our policies to specifically cover equestrian establishments. We sort of do try and offer before and after sales services as well. That's absolutely there. So if you do need to call up in the middle of your policy and make amendments or adjustments, we can look to do that for you. Our risk assessment templates, for example, are there. We would only use the most financially secure A-rated insurers. So yeah, we're there to try and give you that peace of mind. If the worst case happens, if you've been clear and transparent, then, you know, we've got a policy to hopefully cover you. So yeah, absolutely. Hopefully it's sort of been an informative evening and yeah, sort of answered lots of questions. But yeah, no, I'm aware that I've seen them filing in as we've been talking, Cheryl. So I know there's plenty of them. So hopefully we can cover a few.
I've tried to cover the ones, as you know, that have popped up. There was one that I'll ask first while I just go through the others that somebody messaged me the other day, and it was about legal fees. So I don't think we've touched on legal fees a great deal, but I think their question was in relation to a staff dispute, for example, that might see them being taken to a tribunal or some sort of action from staff, or even a dispute perhaps from a livery client. What sort of legal fees cover? Is that a specific policy, or would there be a level of that on a standard policy?
So yeah, I think we did sort of touch on it briefly. So legal expenses wouldn't come as standard necessarily. It would need to be added on to a policy, absolutely. It's not going, if you've already had that dispute occur and then you try and add it onto a policy, it's not unfortunately going to cover anything pre-existing or that's happened in the past. So if you're looking for cover to protect you in the event of employment tribunals, contract disputes, debt recovery, for example, that would all look to come under legal expenses, and that would need to be added on to your policies, and an optional add-on. Again, it's likely you'd perhaps pay an additional premium for it. So yeah, absolutely, you'd want to be checking, can you add it on? And if you do want to include it, then yes, make sure it's there and on your policy.
Okay, I'm going to do like quick fire questions now. So
okay.
I'll try and do ones that I think have quite a straightforward answer. So some of them people have asked, but I'm going to kind of make it more of a generic question. So if something happens between two liveries horses, or if a livery horse injures another livery, is that related to the yard's insurance, or is that something that's between those people that are involved, if it's nothing to do with the yard?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So remember, if it's going to come back on your yard insurance, you'd have to be found negligible or liable for the injury of that horse. So if the horse has, say, injured itself and it's a result of your fencing, or perhaps you hadn't harrowed the arena, for example, then that claim may be pursued against you. Remember, you'd have to be found negligible or liable, which is why you'd be wanting to do all your risk assessments. If it's between the two horse owners' horses, then that claim may likely go back on their own individual vet fee policy, for example. So again, that's why, you know, yards often do sort of require everyone to have their own individual insurance in place. If you've not been involved whatsoever as the yard owner or manager, then that likely would fall back on the two individuals and their two horses that have been involved. But again, your yard insurance is there to protect you in the instance that you are found negligible or liable. But yes, do make sure you are doing all your reasonable precautions to try and prevent that from happening.
Okay, one thing a couple of people asked on care, custody and control, hopefully this doesn't have a really complicated answer, but it was, what is the difference between care, custody and control, what's covered by that, and the public liability? I think some people thought there might be a crossover, and that, you know, if there was something where you could be liable in terms of the maintenance of the field or something, would that be covered under liability as opposed to care, custody and control?
So actually a really good question, and care, custody and control is a section of public liability, but it's a section made specific to the horses themselves if those horses are injured. So if you feel like something's happened, best thing to do is give your broker a call. They can pop you through to the claims team, and they can always note that on your policy. So if then a claim does occur or does arise, you can then accurately describe the circumstances of what's happened there. And then if you've got a specialist broker, they can make sure if a claim does occur, it goes on the right section of your policy. It may well end up being a public liability claim, or it may end up being a care, custody and control claim. It very much would depend on the circumstances of what's happened, and it would be up to the broker or the insurer to take those full details and then go from there for you. So that's a hard one to answer, to be honest, because it's going to depend on,
by case.
Definitely depend on the circumstances. But yeah, the way to think of it is that care, custody and control is sort of a section of the liability, public liability cover, but it's unique and specific to the injury to the horses themselves or death of the horses themselves.
Okay, yeah, I think that's the thing. It's such a unique industry. It's not something you can just do like one singular policy.
Unfortunately not. No, it's not like a sort of holiday insurance where you can just tick it on the end of when you're booking your flights. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. So yeah.
A couple of people have mentioned BHS Gold in various different ways. I don't know if you want to touch on it too much, but I think some people get confused because when I had horses, I had a freelance groom, and she once told me that it was okay, her insurance was BHS Gold, but obviously that's not a professional policy in any way. And in my understanding, the BHS Gold is what's called a last resort policy, which means it's kind of not brilliant. So I guess really you're better off to have specific insurance, are you, than rely on something like, you know, BHS Gold inclusion.
So yeah, just to be clear, that BHS Gold membership is for people who are purely, say, horse owners. They're riding purely recreationally. There's no business activities going on in any way, shape or form. So it's me with my own private horse hacking down the road, something happens, that BHS Gold membership would be there, as you say, as a policy of last resort to protect you as an individual. If you're running a business, that's very, very different, and that's where you need proper commercial liability insurance, such as yard insurance. Because you're running a business, BHS Gold membership definitely would not cover you if those livery horses escaped, or if a livery client's on your yard and injures themselves, you're found negligible or liable. You need the correct commercial insurance in place. So yeah, absolutely. If you're a freelance groom or a freelance instructor, BHS Gold membership would not be suitable for you. If you're a livery yard manager, absolutely not. So yeah, so the way to see it there is they're clear to distinguish that BHS Gold membership has its place if you're just riding purely recreationally. There's no business element, no money exchanging hands, and as a policy of last resort, it could protect you. But if you're running a business in any way, shape, or form, you need the correct insurance in place.
Okay, so I was just going to say to you, there's another.
Hopefully, doesn't confuse matters more.
I was just going to say to you, there was another insurance-related question. Then I remembered that was kind of the whole point of this thing. So one thing which I do think actually we didn't maybe quite touch on specifically enough was if liveries have their own family or friends coming on, I guess to help with their horses, I guess that's under the same as liveries helping liveries, and that it's under the horse's own insurance policy. So again, a yard owner needs to make sure that the horses on the yard are insured ideally.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Right. Blah, 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 blah. Exercising or riding livery clients' horses, would that come under care, custody and control? I would assume so.
Yeah, so yeah, again, a really good one. As long as your business description is correct and you're covered for the business activities you're doing. So yes, you're a competition training yard, and as part of that, and it's again clear in your livery contracts that that's the service you're offering, the livery clients you're aware of your roles and responsibilities, then yes, that could come under care, custody and control. But again, you'd need to make sure that your policy is correct and up to date, and your broker's aware that's what you're doing for it to then be covered properly.
Okay. There's one about rules being broken. So for example, if you state that you must have a hat and gloves on whenever you're handling horses on the yard, somebody doesn't do that and then there's an accident, might you be liable? I guess that comes down to just the defence status, isn't it? Having that in your contract and as a recommendation of behaviour.
Yeah, that's correct, Cheryl. So a bit like how we explained earlier with your sort of livery contracts and rules of, you've got a rule in there about the hay bales, or a rule in there about hats and gloves, and someone deliberately goes against that and injures themselves and a claim's brought against you, it may be there to help defend that claim in that instance.
Okay, because there was a few about dogs on yards as well. I guess that's the same, having signs up saying that dogs aren't allowed, people still taking their dogs. I guess that's all under the same sort of area, isn't it? As in just making people aware and having those rules in place.
Rules in place, yep. And again, you'd want to make sure that every individual has their own insurance in place for their dogs, where equine specific. So yeah, they perhaps want to be checking that that individual owner has their own insurance in place for their dogs, or any other animals they might have.
Okay, right. I got to the bottom. Right. Thank you everybody for staying with us, because I know that we've overrun, but we really wanted to try and make sure that we covered as much information as possible and not just what we thought was important. Oh, somebody has just asked, sorry, I did see that one and I thought it might be confusing, is about if liveries are using equipment provided by the yard, I thought that this might have a complicated answer. If for example, there's a quad that liveries are allowed to use, or does that fall under liability, or it might be a bit too complicated?
Yeah, for something like that, again, you'd be wanting to speak with your broker, because for anything like that, it's more than likely they'd have to refer into the insurers for you to see A, if that can be covered, and B, if it can, what sort of rules or regulations or stipulations may be in place. So certainly if people are using your equipment and it is something like a quad bike, that's not going to be covered as standard, certainly not on our policies. That would definitely be a referral cases. So yes, I would say if you're doing anything extra like that, have a chat with your broker and see if it needs to be added on, and if it is, then yep, checking what you need to do to to allow that essentially for a claim to be valid. But things like that, if it's not been disclosed and a claim or an accident does occur, you know, if your insurance isn't notified, then it may not be covered under a policy. So yeah, something to be careful of.
Okay, right. Don't worry, that was definitely the last question. Right. Thank you to Rosie as well, because she's given up her evening, and it's the first time that I've shared a webinar with somebody else, so it's been quite unusual to try and do it with someone else. So thank you very much for your patience as well, everybody, and Rosie, and all the time getting it sorted. As long as this has been recorded okay, then the recording of this, I think, will be sent out to everybody that was registered. If anybody does have any follow-up questions and they're on the yard owner group, feel free to put them on there, and I will try to refer them to Rosie or other contacts at SEIB and see if I can find a bit more information. And yeah, I think SEIB are going to send some other resources and useful information out as well. So hopefully it's been useful for everybody and that you feel a bit more informed. And yeah, if Rosie's got anything to say, if not, we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, no, well, thank you. So I've been honoured to be asked this evening. So thank you, Cheryl, and to everyone involved behind the scenes making it work. So I know it was a lot of work to sort of get it organised. So yeah, thank you, everyone, and yeah, for your time this evening. Hopefully we have sort of dispelled any myths around insurance. But yeah, I mean, do feel free to fire any questions, and we'll try our best to answer them.
I've seen Carolyn's just put that she's got a lovely to-do list now, and I don't think she's probably the only one. Right, yeah. We'll leave you all to the rest of your evening. Go off and enjoy the rest of it, and thank you again to Rosie and Georgina and Katie at SEIB that have hidden in the background, making sure that this all went okay. So yeah, great. Right, thanks Rosie. Thanks everyone.